Marcus Steele had never imagined he would end up here shackled and bruised, a prisoner of the alien forces he had fought so fiercely against on countless worlds. He was humanity's best and brightest, a soldier forged in the fires of war, and yet here he was surrounded by the overwhelming might of the Vicrax Empire, the alien invaders who had swept through the galaxy like a plague, wiping out entire civilizations. Without a second thought, his ship had been ambushed during a skirmish. The Vicrax knew the humans would come for them eventually, but they weren't ready for what they had captured. In the cold metal halls of the Vicrax mothership, Marcus struggled against his restraints as the alien soldiers dragged him through the corridors. The sharp claws of the Vicrax scratched at the walls. As they walked, their black eyes staring at him with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Marcus was defiant. Even now his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with determination. The aliens thought him a fool for resisting, but they didn't understand the spirit of humanity. They had underestimated what they were dealing with. His mind raced as the Vicrax soldiers threw him into a holding cell. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the empty space. It didn't matter, though. Marcus had faced worse. His training had prepared him for moments like this: isolation, pain, even the fear of death. The difference here was that he wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for the future of his people, the future of humanity itself. As the hours dragged on, Marcus began to analyze his situation. He knew the Vicrax were powerful and ruthless, their empire stretching across multiple star systems. They saw themselves as gods among lesser species. Humanity was nothing more than a nuisance to them, a small, insignificant race of primitive creatures. They had conquered and enslaved countless species before, and they thought it would be no different with humans. They were wrong. He had seen it in their eyes when they had captured him. They didn't believe he would survive. They didn't believe he was capable of anything but defeat. They thought they had broken him before he even had a chance to fight back. But what they didn't know was that Marcus Steele had never been defeated. No matter how dire the odds, he always found a way to win, even when victory seemed impossible. The Vicrax didn't realize it yet, but Marcus wasn't a simple soldier. He was the embodiment of humanity's greatest strength: the ability to adapt, the ability to survive, the ability to fight back against all odds. And as he sat in that cold prison cell, he began to formulate a plan. He knew he wouldn't be able to break free on his own, but he didn't need to escape alone. He needed to outthink them, outlast them, and when the time was right, strike harder than they could ever imagine. A soft click echoed through the cell as the door to his prison opened, and a tall Vicrax soldier stepped inside. The creature's voice was guttural, its alien language incomprehensible, but the malice in its tone was unmistakable. The soldier's eyes narrowed as it approached Marcus, clearly expecting the human to cower or beg for mercy. Instead, Marcus stood tall, staring the creature down. He was ready for whatever came next. This was just the beginning. And he had a plan. The Vicrax had made their first mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and Marcus Steele was about to make them regret it. The Vicrax queen sat high upon her throne in the heart of her palace. Her eyes glinted with cold intelligence as she surveyed the reports brought to her by her trusted commanders. Her vast empire stretched across the galaxy. Her rule was absolute, or so she believed. As the human prisoner was brought before her, she studied him with a sense of detached curiosity. She had ordered his capture, thinking he would be a mere footnote in her conquest, a simple trophy to add to her growing collection of defeated species. Marcus Steele was not what she had expected. His eyes locked with hers, unflinching and cold. There was no fear, no desperation, only defiance. She had seen countless prisoners over the millennia, but none like him, none who dared to meet her gaze without trembling. Her advisors whispered among themselves, sensing something different about this human, but the queen paid them little mind. She had seen lesser creatures crumble before her power. She had heard their desperate pleas for mercy. She had crushed their spirits in an instant. "You are a long way from home, little human," she spoke. Her voice was a mixture of regal authority and cruel amusement. Marcus remained silent, his jaw clenched, but his gaze never wavered. The queen leaned forward, her elongated claws tapping against the armrest of her throne. She found his silence both maddening and intriguing. She had expected fear from him, or at least the hollow words of surrender, but there was nothing. His silence was louder than any words could have been. "I will have you broken," she said coldly. "You will beg for mercy before the end comes for you." She gestured to the chamber guards, who stepped forward to hold Marcus in place, their claws sharp and unforgiving. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't move an inch. The queen's lips curled into a smile, thinking him weak for refusing to beg or plead. But she miscalculated. She believed that because he said nothing, he had already given up. But Marcus had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the most powerful weapon of all. The queen's gaze shifted to the holographic display beside her, where a map of the galaxy appeared, marked with the locations of conquered worlds. The V-Cracks had expanded at an alarming rate. Their fleet unmatched, their warriors feared across the stars. Yet she saw no sign of any resistance from humanity. She had expected a fight, a challenge for dominance. But the humans were nowhere to be found. Their worlds had fallen without a single significant battle fought. She thought them weak. She thought them insignificant. "This human will be no different," she thought. "He will die like all the rest." The queen stood from her throne and walked towards Marcus. The air around her crackled with raw psychic energy, her presence commanding and overwhelming. She extended her hand, hovering just inches from his chest, her power pressing against him like a storm. "You will die in the arena," she said, her voice low and menacing. Marcus only blinked once, his mind already racing, calculating his next move. The queen's overconfidence clouded her judgment. She had seen humans defeated so easily before. She believed him to be no different than the others. But Marcus Steele was not like the others. He was not a prisoner. He was a soldier, and soldiers never give up no matter the odds. He knew his mission. He knew his people's survival depended on him, and he would not let them down. The queen's command was given, the date was set, and the arena would be his fate. But Marcus Steele had already begun to prepare his mind for something greater than survival, something that would shake the foundation of the queen's empire to its core. The sun hung low in the sky over the massive arena, its rays casting long shadows over the dirt floor below. Where Marcus stood, shackled and waiting, he could feel the eyes of the crowd pressing in on him, every pair of alien eyes filled with anticipation, eager for the spectacle they believed was about to unfold. What they didn't know was that Marcus Steele was not the kind of man who would die without a fight, and he had no intention of letting them enjoy his downfall. The V-Cracks queen watched from her high perch in the royal box, her cold gaze scanning the scene below with a twisted satisfaction. She thought the arena would be the perfect stage for Marcus' final moments. It was where so many had met their end. But she believed the outcome was certain. His death would be swift and brutal. He would face the beasts of the arena, and they would tear him apart piece by piece in front of thousands of her loyal subjects. The gates to the arena opened with a deafening clang, the crowd's roar filling the air, as three of the most vicious creatures in the galaxy were released from their cages. These monstrous beasts were native to a world where only the strongest survived, with armored hide and jaws that could crush bone, their fangs dripped with venom and saliva as they circled Marcus like predators. Sensing weakness, they had never encountered a human before, but they had no reason to believe this would be any different from the countless other executions they had witnessed over the centuries. Marcus stood motionless, his body tense, but his mind calm. He could feel the weight of the chains on his wrists and ankles, but he knew that would not stop him. He could hear the deafening roar of the crowd echoing in the arena, but he drowned it out. The only sound that mattered now was his own breath, steady and controlled. The beasts closed in their massive forms, casting dark shadows over him. But Marcus did not flinch. He had faced worse. He had stared down death on countless worlds and survived. He had done it through sheer will and cunning, and today would be no different. The queen leaned forward in her seat, watching intently, her claws gripping the armrest of her throne, her eyes fixed on the human she believed would die today. But as the beasts approached, their first steps were hesitant. Marcus knew how to manipulate fear. He had learned long ago that sometimes you had to make your enemies doubt their own superiority. He stood tall, never breaking eye contact with the nearest beast as it growled low in its throat. The first creature lunged at him with a speed that could have torn him to shreds, but Marcus moved quickly, his body instinctively reacting to the threat. His chains rattled as he sidestepped just in time. The beast's claws slashed the air where he had been a second before, but Marcus was already back on his feet, his mind working at lightning speed. He had to use the creature's own aggression against them. Their size, their power was their advantage, but if he could make them attack each other, he might have a chance. He kicked the ground with all his strength, sending dust into the eyes of the second beast. It recoiled momentarily. And that was all the opening Marcus needed. He darted forward and grabbed the first creature by its throat, his shackled hand struggling to maintain the hold. But his sheer determination won out. The creature twisted and struggled, but Marcus held firm, using his knees to drive it down onto the ground with a sickening thud. The crowd fell silent. The Queen's eyes widened in disbelief. But Marcus didn't stop. He had more work to do. He launched himself at the second beast as it charged him, its jaws snapping wildly. But Marcus anticipated the move, ducking low and sweeping its legs out from under it with a powerful kick. He wasn't just fighting for survival now. He was proving something. He wasn't just some helpless prisoner to be put down. He was a soldier, and soldiers never give up. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Marcus stood over the fallen beasts, his breathing heavy but controlled, his chains rattling as the last of the creatures limped away. It was clear now that the Queen's plans had gone awry. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He wasn't just here to survive. He was here to make them understand one thing: humanity was not to be underestimated. The arena was eerily silent for a moment, the once boisterous crowd now stunned into disbelief as the last of the massive beasts staggered away, its snarls filled with confusion and fear. None of them had ever seen anything like it. A human standing victorious over creatures that had been bred for one purpose, only to kill. Yet Marcus stood alone, his breath coming in slow measured gasps, the blood of the beasts and his own mixed in the dirt at his feet. He was not unscathed. His body was battered, his clothes torn and stained, but there was something in his eyes, a fire that could not be extinguished. The Queen's eyes narrowed from her seat. She had expected the creatures to rip him apart, but now they lay defeated at his feet, and something inside her shifted. She had seen countless battles fought and won across the galaxy, but this human, this soldier, had done something she had never anticipated. He had defied the natural order. He had turned what should have been his final moments into a victory. Her mind raced. Her advisors whispered in the shadows, unsure of what to make of this unexpected turn. But the Queen remained cold. She could not show weakness. She had been victorious over countless species, and she would not let this human be the one to break her streak. She rose from her throne, the air in the arena crackling with her immense psychic power as she gave the order to bring out the second wave. The crowd remained silent as the arena gates groaned open, and the Queen's elite warriors marched forward. Marcus looked up briefly, catching the Queen's cold gaze. She was not done with him yet, but he wasn't finished either. As the V-Crack soldiers entered the arena, he felt a surge of adrenaline shoot through him. He had survived the beasts, but these were not mindless creatures. They were soldiers trained to kill with ruthless efficiency. They were here to finish what the beasts had started, but Marcus had already anticipated this move. He wasn't done yet. The soldiers encircled him, their weapons drawn and ready, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights of the arena. They moved in like a well-oiled machine, every step calculated, every motion precise. Marcus' mind worked faster than ever, calculating his options. He couldn't take them all head-on, not in his condition. But he had something they didn't. He had the element of surprise, and he had the instincts of a soldier who had spent his life fighting against the odds. He feigned exhaustion, his body sagging slightly as though the fight had taken all of his strength, but his eyes never left his enemies. He could feel their confidence building as they believed him weak, and that was exactly what he wanted. The moment one of the soldiers lunged at him, he shifted his weight, throwing the V-Cracks off balance, sending him crashing to the ground. And Marcus was on him in an instant, his shackled hands grabbing the soldier's weapon and using it against him with a brutal efficiency that sent a ripple of shock through the ranks. Another soldier moved in, but Marcus was already gone, his body a blur as he used the same tactic again and again, each move more fluid than the last. He had learned quickly that in the face of overwhelming odds, sometimes you had to make your own luck, sometimes you had to turn their strength against them. And that's exactly what he did. He disarmed and incapacitated the V-Crack soldiers one by one, turning the arena into a chaotic mess of bodies and weapons. The crowd that had once watched in eager anticipation now stared in stunned silence. Their cheers had died down, replaced by the sound of disbelief. Marcus had turned their world upside down. The Queen's grip on the arena's power was slipping, but she refused to acknowledge it. Her eyes burned with fury as she watched her soldiers fall, her empire beginning to tremble under the weight of one human's defiance. Marcus stood over the last fallen soldier, his chest heaving with effort, his chains clinking with every movement. His body was bruised and battered, but he stood tall. The message was clear. He wasn't going to die here, and more importantly, he wasn't going to be their puppet for their entertainment. He had made the impossible happen, and as he turned toward the Queen's seat, he knew one thing for certain: the game had just changed. The Queen watched in silence as Marcus Steele stood amidst the fallen bodies of her elite soldiers, his chest heaving, but his eyes unwavering. The arena was now filled with the sounds of scrambling soldiers and murmurs of disbelief. The crowd, once loud and bloodthirsty, now watched in stunned silence. The Queen's mind raced. She had never encountered a human like this before. They were supposed to be weak, frail creatures, but this human had shattered every expectation. He had turned her grand spectacle into a nightmare, and she realized something in that moment, something that unsettled her deeply. This human was playing a different game. She had underestimated him. She had thought that sheer brute force and her overwhelming psychic powers would be enough to crush him, but now he was proving that there was something more to humanity than what she had assumed. He wasn't just strong, he was clever, and that was something the Queen had never fully accounted for. The Vicrax had always relied on their might to control the galaxy, but this human was showing her that intelligence and cunning could be just as powerful. Marcus knew he had caught her attention. Now the arena was no longer just a battleground. It had become a stage for something greater, a chessboard where each move he made was designed to unsettle the Queen, to make her question everything she believed about the human race. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for humanity's future, and he was willing to do whatever it took to win. The Queen's face remained stoic, but inside her mind, churned. She had heard whispers of humans being unpredictable, but she had never truly understood the depths of their tenacity. Until now, she had watched their civilizations fall without even a whimper. She had seen their fleets decimated by her forces, and their resistance crumble under the weight of the Vicrax war machine. But now this one human had turned her own arena into a place of humiliation. Her thoughts turned to her inner circle, the loyal officers and advisors who had long supported her without question. They had all seen Marcus' display of skill and resourcefulness. But how would they react now? Would they question her decisions? Would they see this human as a threat worthy of attention? The Queen could feel the first tendrils of doubt creeping into the minds of her people, her soldiers, her advisors, and she knew she had to act quickly before that doubt spread too far. She called for a private meeting with her highest-ranking officers in the palace chambers, their voices low as they discussed their next move. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He had already begun planting seeds of doubt in the minds of the Queen's soldiers. He wasn't physically free, but his mind was still his own, and he knew that if he could turn just a few of her trusted lieutenants against her, the rest would follow. He had learned one thing from his years in battle: it wasn't just about the strength of your army, but the loyalty of your soldiers, and the Queen's hold over her empire was beginning to slip. Marcus spent the next days within the confines of his cell, but his mind was working at full speed. He had already found ways to manipulate the guards and the palace staff, playing on their fears and frustrations. He had planted small whispers among the ranks, making the soldiers question their Queen's leadership, her obsession with power, her cruelty toward those who did not obey. He knew that even the smallest crack in her empire's foundation would be enough to bring it all crashing down. The Queen's overconfidence had been her first mistake. She had thought her empire invincible. She had believed that the Vicrax were the superior species, but Marcus Steele was proving her wrong. And every day that passed, Marcus felt the weight of his plan fall into place, one piece at a time. The tension within the Vicrax empire was palpable in the days that followed Marcus' stunning display in the arena. Whispers began to spread among the ranks of the Queen's elite soldiers and advisors. Doubts started to fester like an infection. No longer were the Vicrax invincible. No longer were they the undisputed rulers of the galaxy. Marcus Steele had planted a seed, and now it was growing. It spread from the lowest guard to the highest officer, each one questioning their loyalty, to the queen, each one wondering if they were truly on the side of the superior species, or if they were merely pawns in her ruthless quest for control. The queen could feel the shift in the air, the crackling energy that told her her empire was beginning to fracture. She had always relied on fear to maintain her control, fear of her power, fear of her empire's might. But Marcus Steele had proven that fear alone would not be enough, and now her own people were beginning to question her every command, her every decision, and that was something she could not allow. She called for an emergency council of her top generals and advisors. The room was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the chaos that was bubbling just beneath the surface. As the officers filed in and took their seats, she could see the unease in their eyes, the fear that they too had become uncertain about her leadership, and that was the moment she knew she had lost their trust. But she could not show it, she could not show any sign of weakness. The queen's power was built on the illusion of infallibility, and she would maintain that illusion at all costs. "We cannot allow this to continue," she began, her voice as cold and commanding as ever. "They have seen too much, they have witnessed the impossible, and if we do not act swiftly, this human will unravel everything we have built." Her advisors nodded in agreement, though their eyes betrayed their uncertainty. They all knew what was at stake, but none of them had ever faced an adversary like Marcus Steele. They had never seen a human so capable, so cunning, and so driven by a cause greater than himself. A few of the generals suggested using brute force to suppress the rebellion among their ranks, to execute Marcus and make an example of him, but the queen dismissed them with a wave of her hand. She knew that a show of violence would only make him a martyr, it would make him a symbol of defiance, and the last thing she wanted was for the galaxy to rally behind this human. She needed to crush him not with force, but with something far more effective. She had heard rumors of a weapon hidden deep within her palace, a device capable of wiping out entire populations with a single strike, a weapon that could instill absolute terror in the hearts of any who defied her. But to use it would be to show her desperation, to reveal to the galaxy that her rule was crumbling, that she was no longer the queen who commanded the stars. She wrestled with the decision in silence, her claws tapping nervously against the armrest of her throne. The weapon was a last resort, a final move in a game. She had no intention of losing, yet the longer Marcus remained free, the more she feared he would expose the cracks in her empire to the universe. And once that happened, there would be no going back. It was then that she realized something even more dangerous than Marcus himself lurked in the shadows. Those who had started to doubt her were only the beginning. There were whispers of rebellion spreading across her empire, and she couldn't afford to wait any longer. "I will do what must be done," she said finally, her voice cold and final. Her decision made, there would be no more mistakes, no more hesitation. Marcus Steele would pay for what he had done, and he would learn that no one, not even the humans, were a match for the power of the Vicrax Empire. The queen paced in her chamber, her thoughts swirling around her as her mind calculated the inevitable consequences of her decision. She could feel the weight of her empire bearing down on her shoulders. Like a collapsing star, everything she had built, everything she had fought for, was now on the verge of unraveling. And all of it was because of one human, Marcus Steele. His defiance had spread like wildfire among her ranks. His resistance had become a symbol, and that was something she could not allow to stand. The whispers of rebellion had grown louder with each passing day. She could hear the murmurs from her officers, the uncertainty in their voices, the fear that something was shifting. And in that moment she realized just how fragile her control over the Vicrax Empire truly was. She had thought her power absolute, but now she saw that it had always been built on fear and fear alone, and fear was a brittle foundation. It would crack at the first sign of true resistance. She knew what had to be done. She would use the weapon, the ultimate tool of destruction. She had kept it hidden away for this very moment. It was a device capable of wiping out entire planets with the push of a button, capable of reducing cities to dust and vaporizing entire populations. In an instant she had always kept it in reserve as a deterrent, but now she would use it to send a message not just to Marcus Steele, but to the entire galaxy. The queen summoned her most trusted lieutenant, a brutal officer named Zorith. His loyalty to her had never been questioned. He had followed her every order without hesitation. And now he would carry out her final command. Zorath entered the chamber, his towering form casting a shadow over the queen as he bowed before her, his eyes filled with a mixture of respect and something darker, a hunger for power that had always been present in the Vicrax, but now was starting to bubble to the surface. "What is your command, my queen?" Zorath asked, his voice low and obedient, but there was a glint of something else in his eyes, something she could not ignore. "You will take the weapon to the surface of the humans' planet, and you will use it to destroy everything," she said, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. Her decision was made. The galaxy would witness the power of the Vicrax Empire in all its terrifying glory. She would show them that resistance was futile, and that even the smallest spark of rebellion could be extinguished with a single command. Zorath nodded without question, but there was something in his expression that made the queen pause. Something. She could not put her finger on, a faint glimmer of something that resembled doubt, or perhaps even ambition, but she pushed it aside. Her mind was already made up. The weapon would be deployed and the message would be sent. As Zorath turned to leave, the queen felt a strange shiver run down her spine. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in centuries, a feeling of uncertainty, as though something had shifted in the air around her, and though she dismissed it as the product of her own stress, she couldn't shake the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, Marcus Steele was not the only one who could play the game of minds. With Zorath's departure, the queen's mind turned once more to the weapon. She had given the order for its deployment, and she knew that this was the moment of truth. She would either solidify her dominance over the galaxy, or she would crumble under the weight of her own arrogance. There would be no turning back now. Zorath moved swiftly through the palace corridors, his steps heavy with purpose, his mind focused on the queen's order. He had been entrusted with the weapon, the ultimate tool of destruction, and he knew exactly what it meant to carry out such a command. He had seen the queen's power firsthand, and the fear she instilled in others. But something was different now. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that even the queen could not entirely control. As he approached the hangar where the weapon was stored, he thought of the whispers he had heard recently, the rumors of discontent among the ranks, the unsettling way his fellow officers had begun to look at him, as if waiting for him to make a move of his own. And for the first time in his life, Zorath questioned his loyalty to the queen. He shook the thoughts away. His mission was clear. The weapon was in his hands, and it was his duty to carry out the queen's will, no matter the cost. The weapon itself was a massive device, its power beyond anything he had ever seen, capable of vaporizing entire cities with a single blast. It was the perfect tool for quelling rebellion. But as Zorath prepared the device for launch, a strange unease settled in his chest, a feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. As he boarded the transport ship that would take him to the surface of the humans' planet, he glanced at the weapon one last time, its cold metal surface reflecting the dim light of the hangar. But before he could make the final preparations to activate it, he was interrupted by a voice over his comm system. It was the queen herself. "Zorath, you have your orders," she said, her voice cool and calculated, but there was an edge to it that made him pause. "Make sure the weapon is deployed without delay. We cannot allow this human to continue his disruption, or we risk the entire empire falling apart." Zorath felt a cold chill creep down his spine, but he only nodded, acknowledging the command. He had no choice but to obey. He couldn't afford to hesitate now. But as the transport ship ascended through the atmosphere and headed toward the surface, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap set by Marcus Steele, and the whispers that had been circulating about the queen's leadership were growing louder in his mind. Could it be possible that the queen herself was no longer in control? Could it be that there were forces within her own ranks plotting against her? The transport ship broke through the clouds and descended toward the human planet, its surface, now a battleground with the remnants of previous skirmishes scattered across the landscape. Zorath's heart beat faster as he prepared to unleash the weapon he had been sent to deploy. But just as he was about to give the command, something unexpected happened. The communications console beeped with an urgent message. It was a direct transmission from Marcus Steele himself. Zorath's first instinct was to dismiss it as a trick, but his curiosity got the better of him, and he opened the channel. The voice of Marcus Steele came through loud and clear, calm and composed as ever, even though he was aware of the weapon's impending arrival. "Zoreth, you don't have to do this," Steele's voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "We both know what this weapon represents. It's not just about destroying me. It's about destroying everything the Vkrax Empire claims to stand for. It's a weapon of fear and domination. But fear is not the only thing that can win battles." Zoreth's fingers hovered over the controls, but his mind was racing. Marcus Steele's words struck a chord deep within him, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision he was about to make. He had always been loyal to the Queen, but now he wasn't sure anymore. Was he a soldier fighting for a cause, or was he merely a pawn in a game he no longer understood? As the ship descended closer to the target zone, Zoreth found himself torn between his duty and the nagging feeling that something much larger was at stake here, a war for the soul of the galaxy, one that might end not with the destruction of a single human, but with the collapse of everything the Queen had worked so hard to build. Zoreth's fingers trembled above the activation console as Marcus Steele's voice continued to echo in his mind. It wasn't just the words that were unsettling, it was the truth behind them, the realization that he had spent his entire life serving a cause that was built on fear and control, a cause that had never truly cared for the people it claimed to protect, a cause that had enslaved countless species in the name of power and dominion. Marcus Steele was right. Fear alone couldn't win wars. It could crush rebellion in the moment, but it could never build anything lasting. And as Zoreth looked down at the weapon in front of him, he began to see it for what it truly was, a tool of destruction, with no purpose beyond annihilation. The transport ship descended into the smoke-filled atmosphere of the human planet. The once bustling cities, now reduced to ruins from previous conflicts. The signs of battle were everywhere. Broken structures, burned-out husks of military vehicles scattered across the desolate landscape. Zoreth's mind raced, but his fingers remained still above the console, as if frozen in time. He thought of the Queen's commands, her cold, calculated voice, and the image of the weapon she had entrusted to him. But then he thought of Marcus Steele's message and the courage the human had shown in the arena. He had survived the beasts, he had survived the soldiers, and now he was proving that there was another way to fight, a way that didn't involve mindless destruction. As the ship descended closer to the surface, Zoreth's heart beat faster, his thoughts spinning out of control. He couldn't do it. He couldn't unleash the weapon, not after everything he had learned about Marcus and his defiance. He couldn't be a part of the Queen's tyranny any longer, and with that thought his decision was made. He slammed his fist onto the console, disabling the weapon's activation and sending the transport ship into an emergency hover. The ship's autopilot took over as Zoreth opened the comms once again and spoke directly to Marcus Steele. "I'm not your enemy anymore," he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "I don't know what's going to happen now, but I can't follow the Queen's orders anymore. I'm shutting down the weapon. It's over." There was a long pause on the other end, but then Marcus's voice came through, soft but filled with understanding. "Good," he said. "I knew you could see it, Zoreth. We all have a choice to make now. The galaxy is waking up, and it's not going to be ruled by fear anymore. You're not alone in this. We're going to rebuild together." Zoreth felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he listened to Marcus's words for the first time in his life. He felt free from the chains of servitude, freed from the control of the Queen and her empire. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he had made the right choice. The ship landed on the broken surface of the planet. Zoreth stepped out cautiously, glancing around at the devastation that surrounded him. He had never seen a world so torn apart by war, so ravaged by conflict, and yet he could feel a flicker of hope in the air, a sense that this destruction wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. As Zoreth made his way toward Marcus's position, he saw the human standing tall in the midst of the chaos, his eyes filled with determination, a warrior who had fought for his people and his beliefs. No matter the odds, Zoreth approached him slowly, but without fear. He knew that this was the start of something new, something that could change the course of the galaxy forever. Marcus looked at him and smiled, the faintest glimmer of hope shining through as he extended a hand towards Zoreth. "Welcome to the fight," he said. "Together we can end the reign of fear." And as Zoreth took Marcus's hand, he knew that the war was far from over, but the tide was turning. The galaxy had a new chance at life, a chance to rebuild from the ashes of tyranny into something stronger, something united, and something free.